Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I'm coming to you. Hope everyone is well this evening. Coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. There's been many different developments. So I will get to it. I think this is about the 52nd or 53rd session of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. So it's been about a year. This is going strong. Yesterday was Vimy Day, Vimy Ridge commemoration, battle in World War I, Prime Minister, Defense Minister, a whole bunch of Canadian Army accounts all across Twitter was really promoting hard that this was such an important day, the fight for freedom, peace, and justice. The Prime Minister, Defense Minister, all referred to Vimy as the battle as being a fight for freedom, justice, and peace, which is completely bananas. The World War I was a wild horror inter-imperial conflict that led to insane amounts of death and destruction for almost nothing. And Canadians garrisoned British colonies in the Caribbean during World War I. Canadians fought to conquer parts of Africa during World War I, parts of the Middle East, invaded Russia, used chemical weapons in Iraq, in Russia, helped conquer Palestine during World War I. This had nothing to do with peace, freedom, and justice. But here we are a century later, and the propaganda apparatus of the Canadian government is pumping out this astounding depiction of what happened 100 plus years ago. One of the big contradictions around World War I and Vimy specifically, there was some of the tweets that said Canada was born at the battle. And that's a commonly held, commonly promoted idea. But simultaneously, we talk about Canada being a peaceable kingdom. So on one hand, we were born as a nation in this insane inter-imperial conflict. And the other hand, we are this peaceable nation. Go figure. But that is part of the sort of mythology and the propaganda around Canada's role in the world. And it should be noted that Canada joined World War I for the purpose of supporting the British Empire. A couple of days ago, David Puglisi at the Ottawa Citizen reported that the Royal Canadian Navy has put forward a pitch to buy submarines that will cost $60 billion. The talk is it would be up to $100 billion. So this is on top of the fighter jets, the surface combatants. The surface combatants alone, naval vessels is talking about 80 billion is now the upfront costs, and towards 300 billion over their life cycle. So this is just more of this incredible devotion of public resources to the military that receives very little critical attention, though the population polls consistently show the public is fairly ambivalent around increased military spending. The Globe and Mail on Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm not sure what day it was this last week, they had a story about Operation Flintlock, which is the US-led military exercise in West Africa. And Canadian Special Forces are part of that again. That's been going on for about a decade now. And the whole question of there's this whole sort of, it's justified partly as responding to jihadist violence in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali region. And but there's this whole history that the important part of military training and assistance programs is about influence and about Canada building influence, Canadian military building influence with other countries' militaries. And they was quite explicit about this after independence in Africa, and how the Canadian military saw this as very important for its political objectives to train different countries' militaries to have influence within particularly the leadership of different countries' militaries. And I think that's the basic point of things like the military training assistance program that Canada has. It brings other countries' soldiers to this country to train, and Operation Flintlock. In the most well documented and maybe egregious case, the Canadian trained military after independence in Ghana will overthrow Kwame Nkrumah. And the Canadian officials boasted about the role of the Canadian training mission, keeping the Ghanaian military more Western-oriented, more colonial, maintaining its colonial ideology or way of being, and how Canada's training helped in maintaining that, and then how the Canadian trained forces ousted Nkrumah, and Canada's and High Commissioner in Accra in Ghana boasted about that when after Nkrumah was ousted. So the whole question of military training is not one that I think gets that much attention, but it's an extension of Canadian foreign policy and Canada having influence globally. London, Ontario Liberal MP Ariel Kayabaga was in Rwanda, may still be in Rwanda, and she put out a number of tweets in the last couple of days of her sort of meeting with Rwandan government officials, ministers, and part of the commemoration of the genocide. And in one of her tweets, it was this glowing tweet about Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. And it said, it quoted him saying she was at an event where he was speaking. And apparently he said, if you have to choose to be right or be kind, I hope you choose to be kind, because you'll always be right when you choose to be kind. Leaving aside, I don't know, this sort of pop philosophy, this is completely incredible. Paul Kagame is somebody who has unleashed insane amounts of death and destruction. From his role in militarily ousting the government in Uganda in 1986, to, of course, invading Rwanda in 1990 and ousting the government, shooting down the planes that killed the president of Rwanda in 1994, which then unleashed, of course, the mass killing, to his invasions of the Congo, ousting the government in the Congo in 1996, and then reinvading. And now today, the M23, the Rwandan-sponsored militia, is unleashing all kinds of death and destruction. Towards 1 million people have been displaced in Eastern Congo. This is far worse than a Canadian MP going to Moscow right now and saying, some Vladimir Putin said, you have a choice to be nice or be kind. To be kind. This is incredible. And thus far, there doesn't seem to be any pushback, which fits with Paul Kagame, Rwanda as being this ally, long-standing ally, and that's why he's able to get away with the violence that has unleashed in the Congo. And it should also be said that Kagame's democratic legitimacy is exceedingly thin. Vladimir Putin's democratic legitimacy is far stronger than Kagame. Any way you cut it, right? If if you take this sort of the ethnic kind of line on Rwanda, and that there's all this ethnic tension, Tutsi Hutu tension. Well, Hutus are 90% of the country. I mean, so it doesn't make any sense even that you would have a Tutsi able to win elections if there was that level of ethnic animosity. Nevertheless, this is what we have from this MP. And she put out a whole bunch of other tweets that were sort of pretty questionable. It's curious to see if anyone actually pushes back against that in the coming days. I responded on Twitter, but there's very little pushback. Tamara Lawrence has a good piece in the Canada Files a couple days ago titled "War Making is Canada's Feminist Foreign Policy," really attacking the rhetoric that Trudeau puts out there on his foreign policy, of this progressive rhetoric of feminist foreign policy, and this, so many different ways in which it's bankrupt. But obviously the staunch militarism of the Liberals is a stark way. Greg Shupak has a good piece on Canadian Dimension titled "The Case Against Iran Sanctions," which looks into Canadian policy in Iran. There was a tweet that put out a couple of days ago that Greta Thunberg, or how you pronounce her name, retweeted, that I saw, about how atmospheric CO2 has hit its highest level ever, 423.01 parts. And this is passed with almost no commentary. And there's been terrible floods in Somalia, and also drought in recent bit. Horrible. Millions of people are without or in a tenuous situation in terms of food. And of course, Somalis are responsible for very little of global greenhouse gas emissions. I saw a graph comparing Canadian and Haitian greenhouse gas emissions, and it's just stunning, right? Like, Haiti basically doesn't even register, and Canada's 100. Wasn't exactly clear, but 100 plus times per capita carbon emissions. And the places that are bearing the brunt of the climate disturbances are responsible for very little. And Canada, of course, is continuing, right? This still all kinds of different subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, still increasing tar sands production, even with the terrible story of the pollution into the First Nations community last few weeks. That story's floating around out there. And the consequences are increasingly being felt all around the world, and the injustice of those who are the victims, the primary victims, and having been responsible for very little is really stark. And of course, it's comparing between countries is not looking at the capitalist and corporate forces that are largely driving all of this. But it is really stark to just make the inter-nation comparisons. So Israel, of course, launched more attacks. Went into Al-Aqsa Mosque and beat worshippers recent nights. Justin Trudeau brought it up at a press conference where he said he was concerned about unspecified violence around the mosque in East Jerusalem. And the NDP has been a fair bit better. Most of the NDP MPs, a whole bunch of the NDP MPs I saw, criticized it online, some of it with decent kind of language. Jagmeet Singh put out a statement or a tweet saying The terrifying, disturbing, and brutal violence at the Alaska Mosque makes it clear that Canada can no longer stand on the sidelines. The NDP will move a motion to discuss immediate steps Canada can take to help end violence and violations of human rights and international law. I'm not sure when that motion is going to come forward. A number of people online pointed out that they should just uphold the resolution that was passed, promote the resolution that was passed at their 2021 convention, calling for ending arms sales and also ending relations with the products from the occupied West Bank. So bringing in some degree of sanction. It's not really a sanction, but some degree of actual cost on Israel for its flagrant violations of Palestinian rights. So there's some of the liberal MPs. There's one liberal MP that criticized the government for not for basically supporting Israel. Obviously, none of this is getting into the real fundamental, the depth of the, as I've put it, the innumerable ways Canada assists Palestinian dispossession. But it's, at least at a rhetorical level, there's some positive comments. We'll see where that goes. Now, Melanie Joly actually had a bit stronger language on Twitter than the Prime Minister, criticizing what happened at the mosque. But then she also was quick to condemn in the other direction. So Joly put out a tweet saying, "Canada strongly condemns the firing of rockets into Israel originating from the south of Lebanon and Gaza. Our thoughts are with civilians impacted by these attacks." Now, this is really stark, right? The biggest number of rockets from Lebanon into Israel since 2006, and the war between Israel and Hezbollah, or Israel's war on Lebanon in 2006, that left, I think, about 1,200 people dead and destroyed huge amounts of infrastructure. Now, condemning the rockets coming from Lebanon, sure. I mean, that's sort of fine. But the double standard is just off the charts. Israel has been bombing Syria on a weekly basis in the past couple months, since the terrible earthquake that hit mostly Turkey, but also northern Syria. Israel has bombed the Damascus airport, and even worse, the Aleppo airport twice. That's where the earthquake relief is going through. And the UN condemned Israel for doing that, for bombing the airport, and it's bombed many other targets as well. But the nothing from the Canadian government. So I just published a piece that went into the history. Most of the focus, and most of my focus, and obviously the Palestine Solidarity Movement's focus, has been on Israel's violence against Palestinians and the dispossession, the theft of Palestinian lands, the refusal, the ethnic cleansing, et cetera, et cetera. But Israel's regional violence is also a huge issue, and that we don't really talk about that much, right? The bombing, like I said, the bombing of Syria, also the assassinations in Iran. Israel's been assassinating officials in Iran, regularly over the past handful of years. The New York Times has reported on these. They don't usually come out and admit it, but it's been pretty widely reported. And Canada has basically backed Israeli violence in the region, since the get-go, right? The initial Israeli Air Force was headed by a Canadian. Canadians dominated it. World War II veterans of Canada's military provided, and hundreds of Canadians fought with the Israeli force that ethnically cleansed Palestine in 1947-48. And then immediately started providing weapons to the new state, while Israel's incursions into Egypt and the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip at the time. The UN condemns Israel in 54, 55. Canada continues for killing Egyptians. Canada continues to sell weapons. A big plan to sell fighter jets to Israel in 1956 and to train Israeli Air Force. Now, when Israel does invade, the only time when Canada, I would say, does really oppose an Israeli military intervention, a war, active aggression, is with 56. And that's when Israel, Britain, and France invade Egypt, the so-called Suez Crisis. But that's only because Washington opposed that invasion for its own geopolitical reasons. And that's why we came up with the whole peacekeeping mission. It was really not to protect Egyptian sovereignty, but to lessen hostilities between Washington and London and division within NATO. In 56, we did come out against what Israel had done, though Lester Pearson, the foreign minister at the time, quietly did all kinds of support for Israel still. Like I said, tons of weapons in advance. But in Israel's other major wars, in 67, we provided all kinds of support before, during, after, justified. At the UN, we played a role in creating the tension that Israel used to justify the invasion. And afterwards, we refused to support initiatives to have Israel withdraw. Tried to frame Israel as it was a David and Goliath, even though Israel won the war in 6 days. So when Israel bombs Iraq in 1981, similarly, we don't really oppose it. Lebanon invasion of 82. There's a little bit of rhetorical condemnation, but basically continue support. And then in 2006, of course, the Lebanon invasion, Harper openly supports it. They're not even rhetorical. And vetoes of francophonie resolution condemning the invasion and votes against UN resolutions. So there's this long history. Israel's just waged incredible violence, bombing Jordan, Tunisia, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, all assassinations in Iran, Sudan, bombing Sudan. Israel's unleashed all kinds of violence over many decades. It's basically its whole existence has been one of threatening violence against regional neighbors or committing that violence. And Canada has basically supported that throughout the bulk of that violence. On a positive note, the city of Toronto dropped their case against food vendors, the left-wing restaurant that was attacked viciously by the Israel lobby a couple of years ago. And as part of that, there was a claim. The city of Toronto claimed that they were anti-Semitic, and finally, after a long legal battle, the city of Toronto just finally dropped the case. So that's a positive victory for the food vendors, the owner was just viciously attacked. Somebody who clearly left-wing, pro-Palestinian person. And they went at it completely off the charts. And I have to say, I want to make this clear, I think Independent Jewish Voices also sort of threw food vendors under the bus. And I was disappointed to see them repeat their press release to retweet their press release that came out, that they put out back when it happened 2 years ago, and to retweet it a couple of days ago. The Intercept published this story titled "Pro-Israel Fund Manager Invested $500 million in Israeli Arms Firm." And this head of a Scotiabank fund, I've actually forgot to write his name down on my paper. He put $500 million into Elbit Systems, a big Israeli arms company, very controversial firm. And as the Intercept story points out, this is like way out of proportion with the other capitalist banks that are invested in don't care about any ethics and are invested in the company. I think they have like $1 million or a couple $1 million of stock. So it's a huge amount, very out of proportion. And some of us, the campaigning group has been raising this, and it was like 13,000 or 15,000 people signed a petition on this, and they brought it to the Scotiabank's board and the company and stuff. And basically, the story points out that the guy, I don't have his name in front of me, he's a staunch anti-Palestinian, and his fund, he's used his influence within the Canadian banking system to invest in a whole bunch of controversial Israeli arms firms. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes, if the bank actually divests or feels some pressure, because it is a pretty egregious case. On shifting gears to China, the Davide Mastrucce had a good piece titled in Passage titled "The Media's Coverage of Alleged Chinese Interference is Racist," and goes over, sort of delves into the subject from just a strictly kind of racist or not racist angle, and I think he makes a pretty strong case. The whole foreign interference thing is just ramping up. On the front of today's Hill Times, Heather McPherson, the NDP foreign affairs critic, who's in Taiwan, is pushing this. We're going to Taiwan in part to learn about how to combat foreign interference, because China's been interfering in Taiwan for so long, and this kind of angle. And so it's pushing. And now, at the same time, of course, I should say, with regards to this trip, so they're meeting with the president, the Taiwanese president, Tsai Ing-wen, and this delegation has NDP, Liberal, Conservative, Bloc Québécois representatives. And of course, this is all playing around with the whole one China policy, and Canada's, as I understand it, and do correct me if I'm wrong, Canada basically recognizes one China. It recognizes that Beijing leads that one China, and it recognizes that Taiwan is part of that one China. And so these efforts to sort of undercut that, which is what the US and Canada have been doing, and what this, from a Chinese perspective, Chinese government perspective at least, this visit would be doing, is a bit of a dangerous game. It's obviously tied into ratcheting up tensions. In the Hill Times article, they pointed out that the Canada China Legislative Group, which has been around for 25 years or so, that they haven't met for many years. It's, I guess, MPs, and they now, the Conservative is saying, we're not going to meet. I'm not willing to meet so long as this whole Chinese interference in Canada. So that's being used very clearly as a way to not have diplomatic relations, or not diplomatic relations, but have sort of friendship relations between Canadian MPs and their Chinese counterparts. And so that's all, part of the ratcheting up of tensions and this. Now, the Michael McCall, who's the chair of the U.S. House of Foreign Affairs Committee, senator, Republican senator, a couple of days ago, he said, in response to a question about if China was to invade Taiwan, he said he believed that troops were on the table. He basically said the U.S. would be prepared to send troops. So pushing up this idea about going to war over China, over Taiwan, and with the recent Taiwanese president's visit in the U.S. A couple of days ago, China has launched a bunch right now, or last 24 or 48 hours, a whole bunch of exercises that are, of course, very threatening to Taiwan. And this is all part of this game that's been going on now for many months of just ratcheting up tensions on the question of Taiwan, which is tied into the broader Washington bid to contain China's rise, because China's economic power might start or is starting to threaten U.S. domination of East Asia. And so the Canadian delegation with the NDP foreign affairs critic right in the middle of that is pushing all of that. And in this report, it was also this report that came out that just a couple of days ago that the parliamentary committee put out about Taiwan. And one of the things they call for is they're sort of pushing back against the one China policy, kind of softly and not directly, but also they're saying there should be regular visits of Canadian parliamentarians to Taiwan. So this is part of the growing tensions that they're seeing. This morning, I got an email from Rights Action, very good group that does mostly support in Guatemala around the victims of Canadian mining companies. And they had a story about a Newsweek story that reported that the Canadian mining company has gotten the rights to this mine in Guatemala that it was in control of a Switzerland-based company that was put under U.S. sanctions because of their ties to Russia. And so Newsweek reported, quote, with the support of the U.S. government, the Guatemalan assets of the Switzerland-based Solway Investment Group, which were put under U.S. sanction amid allegations of Russian influence peddling and ecological devastation, are in line for acquisition by Montreal-based Central American Nickel for a substantial discount. So, as Rights Action pointed out, this is a long history. There's a 60-year history of this Canadian mine, all kinds of violence, displacing. This goes back to the Exxon mine set up by Inco. There's all kinds of different variations, ownership. There's a big legal battle in Canada around the 8 Mayan Quechua women who were raped by security forces. That's been winding through Canadian legal system for many years. Now, what this part of the backdrop to the U.S. helping the Canadian company get the rights back, Canadian company rights back to this mine, is this whole question of nickel and the so-called green technologies and this battle with China over securing minerals for this, again, so-called green transition. And so the U.S. government wants a Canadian company in control of this, partly because it doesn't want Chinese company involved. And as is pointed out by Rights Action, it says the Canadian government's policy is the minerals on or under Quechua lands are vital to our national security and critical minerals supply chain. So the Canadian government is increasingly blocking Chinese companies from purchasing Canadian companies that don't operate in Canada, but operate the lithium in Chile, or there's big battle of that in Argentina. So the natural resources in Chile and Argentina, Guatemala are viewed as part of our national security interests. So we get to decide, how that gets used. Anyways, it's an interesting story, and this Exxon mine is one of incredible violence, destruction, like part of the genocide against Mayan that the Guatemalan government perpetrated, and Canadian officials, is well documented in the book Testimonio that came out about a year ago, details all of this, Canada's role in all of this, and that's from the head of Rights Action. Canada Files published a story a couple of days ago titled "Ukrainian Diaspora's Influence Over Canadian Foreign Policy Decisions." And it mostly just sort of rehashes a lot of what's been out there, what we know. One detail that was interesting is that it says that on the 40th anniversary of the 1941 Declaration of Independence of Ukraine, Mahmoud Khalili, one of the field commanders of the Afghan Mujahideen, who fought against the Soviets, was present to celebrate at the Ukrainian Canadian Congress 40th anniversary of the celebration of Ukrainian independence. So they actually had, apparently the story, they had members of the Mujahideen fighting in Afghanistan that, of course, the U.S. and Canada backed to weaken the Soviet Union. They apparently, one of them showed up at the celebration. A prominent Russian blogger, Vladlen Tatarsky, was blown up in St. Petersburg about a week ago. And a couple days after, so this guy's like a militarist blogger. He's actually Ukrainian, grew up in the Donbass, worked in the coal mines, and started a business. And then at some point, apparently robbed a bank. And he was in jail in 2014 when Yanukovych was ousted, and then he joined with the separatist forces against fighting the government in Kyiv, and fought for many years. And then he had become a prominent pro-war Russian Telegram blogger, and apparently go to the front lines and videos. And he's this crowd of people who apparently they support the war, but they're critical of how the Russian military is fighting the war. Oftentimes, I think they want even more aggressive actions by the Russian military. And so the Russian ambassador at the UN, the Russian account of the UN, tweeted out a couple of days after Tatarsky was blown up at this cafe, and there was like 30 other people injured, 19 sent to hospital, and you could see images of the cafe all blown out, windows all blown out. The Russian ambassador at the UN tweeted out, "We heard no reaction to the assassination of journalist Tatarsky from the international community, the UN, or journalist organizations. There is selectiveness when assessing what happened to journalists here and there. They'd have commented if it had not been a Russian journalist." And that's all, fair. You can debate the description of him as just a journalist, and you can debate some of these things, but that's I think a broadly fair comment from the Russian ambassador. Now, he wasn't killed because he had been in jail. He wasn't killed because he had fought he was killed because he was prominent war propagandist. Let's be clear about it. You call that a journalist, you call that a blogger, you call that a war propaganda, whatever you want to call that exactly. That's why he was killed by all. And I mean, I don't think anyone's debating that. But Canada's ambassador to the UN responded to the Russian ambassador's tweet by saying, because he was not a journalist, he was a vitriolic propagandist, a spreader of hate and misinformation with a criminal record. Russian journalists are either in exile or in jail. So this is Bob Rae coming pretty close to saying, basically justifying blowing up a pro-war Russian at a cafe in St. Petersburg. And, you can have a sort of debate. I mean, I think there is an interesting debate around the idea that the people who pull the triggers it's fair game to kill them, but that it's not fair game to kill those who often have much more influence, who are, providing the arguments or the justifications or promoting the wars, the sort of journalists or intellectuals. You can have that debate, and that's, I think, a somewhat interesting debate. But in the here and now, Bob Rae doesn't think it's okay to blow up a cafe where Terry Glavin or Andrew Coyne, prominent pro-war, be it the 2003 Iraq War or Libya or whatever, basically every war, Canadian journalists. As one person pointed out on Twitter, is like, this is the Bob Rae is saying it's open game to blow up any cafe that Thomas Friedman is speaking at. Or another one, I think something like open season on the Globe and Mail editorial board. Anywhere the Globe and Mail editorial board is speaking, Globe and Mail's editorial board has supported every damn war that Canada's been part of, going back a century. So this is a pretty intense kind of apology for what we would certainly not consider acceptable. Bob Rae wouldn't consider acceptable in this country. To make it even worse, New Brunswick former NDP leader, but then turned Conservative Party, and in the Conservative, he was a minister in the New Brunswick Conservative government, and is still a member of the legislature there. Dominic Cardy, he responded on Twitter to this by saying that he basically wished that Julian Assange had also been killed in the attack, based upon this back and forth, which was pretty remarkable comment. He made a sort of this joke of he wished that Julian Assange was also inside the cafe. I mentioned Terry Glavin in a piece titled, the National Post titled "The Russian Propagandists Amongst Us," which was based upon that enemy of my enemy report that we discussed in the last session of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. That's basically saying that critics of NATO and Canada's policy towards the proxy war, that they're all just Russian stooges. Terry Glavin calls me, quote, among the most prominent pro-Putin apologists in the Western world, in the National Post, alongside Aaron Mate and totally blanking on her name right now, Eva Bartlett, and even though I've condemned the invasion of dozens of times, I've said it's illegal and brutal dozens of times, yet I'm among the most prominent pro-Putin apologists in the Western world, which just gives a sense of the climate that we're operating in. And there was a demo here on Tuesday, I think it was, on April 4th, which was the anniversary of 74th anniversary of NATO's foundation. It's a small rally in front of the Radio Canada offices here in Montreal. And this guy who calls himself a lefty, who's a staunch proponent of the NATO proxy war, he responded to my tweet about the demo by referring to it as a, quote, a pro-Russian demonstration of 30 people. So the Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix organized this rally, 30 or 40 people, and on the anniversary of NATO, and he just dismisses it as just a pro-Russian rally. Well, the Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix was established, I think, 4 years ago now, a bit more than 4 years ago. And the first thing it did was it organized a march on the 70th anniversary, a demonstration, 250, 300 people, on the 70th anniversary of NATO's creation, before Russia invaded. Mouvement Québec pour la Paix has been very clear it opposes NATO, since its creation. In large part, it was created to oppose NATO. So this idea of formulating criticism of NATO as just pro-Russia is remarkable. But this is the political climate that we're living in. To say we want less military spending is to say you support Russia killing people in Ukraine. To say we oppose NORAD and NATO is to say you support Russia killing in Ukraine. This is the this sort of intellectual climate that a large swath of people are pushing out there. And the Kyiv Independent, and I personally have been targeted in this, of course, many different instances. And there's the Journal de Montréal story from 4 months ago where it called disruptions that went back to 2019, where Solidarité Québec Haïti disrupted around Haiti. It called that Russian propaganda. I mean, it was about Haiti. It was in 2019. It claimed that like disruptions around Palestine, around the climate, around Venezuela, that going back to 2019 was all part of this Russian propaganda thing. So basically, like all left-wing, anti-imperialist, pro-peace activism is just all repackaged as pro-Russia, pro-Putin, whatnot. Now, the Kyiv Independent, which is a paper, a media outlet that was set up about 2 years ago, that came out of another pro sort of NATO English language Ukrainian media outlet, It was set up with $200,000 of Canadian government funding that was reported on by the Globe Mail over a year and a half ago or so. And it had this piece just going after David Puglisi, okay, who is the preeminent military reporter in this country, most prominent military reporter, I think by a major margin. And David Puglisi is, he's too pro-military for my liking, but he questions the military. He questions the military at every level, just in sort of narrow bureaucratic level. Of the recent story about they're not paying the Canadians training, the Canadian soldiers training in Poland are not, like, they're having to go out of pocket to pay for their food, and this whole they're not paying them. So stories like that Puglisi revealed, to maybe more kind of to the story about the submarines I just mentioned, about $60 billion in submarines, to some good stories about Libya and Canada's war in Libya, and how the military knew that they were basically supporting Al Qaeda. This goes back. He's been at the Ottawa Citizen for 35 years. Okay, this is somebody totally in the mainstream, at the progressive end of the mainstream of corporate media, but totally inside the mainstream, with tons of contacts within the Canadian military. And the Kyiv Independent did this hit piece on him, where they quote Ukrainian government officials who have now decided he's undesirable, and they cite him alongside Tucker Carlson and Glenn Greenwald, but they sort of say he's gone under the radar. He's been this, like, and they refer to him as he echoes Kremlin talking points. And they quote, the Kyiv Independent quotes a Canadian official, anonymous Canadian official, basically saying that Puglisi is a Putin propagandist. So some of this labeling of dissent, of questioning of the military as a pro-Putin propaganda, is even reaching someone like Puglisi. And I should say that a couple of these bloggers, Marcus Kolga and this other guy, they jumped on it, right? These are people who've not liked Puglisi's reporting for a lot of years, a guy from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, I believe. They jumped on it, and they sort of like, oh, it's great. They use this Kyiv Independent attack against Puglisi to say that their nemesis has always, he always knew he was some secret pro-Putin guy. I mean, he's been at the Ottawa Citizen since 1989. So this is part of the climate that we're living in politically, intellectually. Just to finish off, this has been a little bit on the long side. Just to finish off, Brazil, Lula, President of Brazil, put forward a peace plan, some negotiations. It's not exactly clear what happened, but they have put peace proposal out there. Lula, in what he's raised, and they reached out to Zelensky's government. I think they reached out, of course, to the Russian government as well. And what Lula raised is that NATO not being in Ukraine, and that Crimea is not going to be going back to Ukraine. And apparently, it's Ukrainian government's not happy about this. But just to give you a little sense of where, now we have a Chinese proposal, we have Brazil proposal, nothing from the Canadian government. They don't react to this, right? I mean, they criticize the Chinese proposal. In the case of Brazil, they haven't criticized the Brazilian proposal. They don't support it. They don't support when Turkey tries to negotiate things either. So, anyways, that's a development on the question of Ukraine. And so, if anyone has any comments or questions, go ahead. I'm not sure if. I'm going to make Laurel a co-host.
Okay, so you've got Yuri with a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Wow, Eve, so much to respond to that, but three ones, you can respond to any of them or not respond to any of them. When it comes to Congo and Rwanda, I'm just so surprised that, given what Paul Kagame has done to Congo, that nobody speaks out against it, even minimally in the press. Is that still really the case that regardless of what Paul Kagame has unleashed, his reign of terror in Congo, that it still doesn't get any condemnation or his arresting of opposition folks? And if you have any updates on what's going on in Haiti, Canada's role in Haiti, would love to know that. And then one final one, when it comes to Ukraine, are we past the point of we can no longer really engage in honest debates with folks when it comes to Ukraine if the response is always you're a tanky this, you're a Putin apologist that, and should we just ignore even engaging with folks, especially if it's self-described leftists when it comes to the thorny topic of Ukraine or anything when it comes to Russia related matters?
Yeah, well, start off with the Congo thing. The Congo and the Kagame thing is kind of interesting because the front page of the Globe and Mail, Jeffrey York and Judy Rever, sorry, I get names mixed up, have had a whole series of pieces on the front page of the Globe Mail that proved, I think it was already clear, but proved beyond a reasonable doubt that it was Kagame that blew up the plane with the Rwandan and Burundian presidents, much of the Rwandan military command, I believe a couple ministers, in 1994. They used RPGs from Uganda. So they traced the actual RPGs that blew up the plane to a stock that was, I forget from what country it came from, to the Ugandan military. And that was on the front page of the Globe Mail multiple times. And even to the point where they had a piece, again, I'm pretty sure on the front page, this is about 3 years ago, where Louise Arbour, who was the head of the Rwanda Tribunal, Canadian Supreme Court Justice, who was already known that she suppressed looking into who perpetrated that crime that unleashed the mass killings of 1994. Okay? That they even basically went at Louise Arbour saying, like, why didn't you investigate that? And Louise Arbour did a danced around it, whatever. Okay, so this is on the front page. Also on the front page of the Globe and Mail is that Kagame has this international assassination ring. The ones that Jeffrey York is the Globe correspondent in Africa, he's based in South Africa. And so the assassinations that took place in South Africa of a number of former high-level RPF, close allies, people who have all kinds of blood on their hands, right? Close allies of Kagame, but then turned. And then he goes and gets them assassinated in South Africa, which displeased the South African government, of course. This is reported on in the Globe and Mail. So on the front page as well. So this is not like anybody who bothers to this is not controversial anymore. This was often like these like left-wing domains or these like, Great Lakes region experts, people like the very good book that Herman and The Politics of Genocide, I think it's called. Forget another guy's name who wrote that book. This is all like discussed years ago in sort of like left wing or Africa, but now it's been on the front page of the Globe Mail. So this should not be at all controversial. That, not to mention all the UN reports about what Kagame has done in the Congo. That's a whole other side to it. And yet you have these MPs and the Prime Minister. This is not just a sole MP. This MP, I believe, is of Rwandan descent, probably Tutsi, is currently in Rwanda putting out this stuff. But Trudeau has met with Kagame multiple times. So despite all of that, it just continues on. So at an intellectual level, I mean, the dossier against Kagame is just absolutely overwhelming. There's no way in which it's like any way that this regime is justifiable internally. It's assassinations in the region. It's incredible violence in the Congo. It's background. They're the ones who invaded in 1990, right? They invaded from Uganda. That beyond blowing up the plane that leads to the mass killings, they invaded in 1990. That also is it's an act of aggression that leads to the destabilization of Rwanda as well. So the cases are just absolutely overwhelming, and it's if it just sort of continues on because he's still an ally of Washington. He's still an ally of the empire, and that's how the game works. And I don't actually remember the other question. There's something about Haiti. I don't know of any particular development in Haiti, Canada's role in Haiti in recent weeks, but there was a story in the CBC about the Canadian purchased light armored vehicles and how they haven't been delivered, and the Haitian government criticism around that. It's all, I think, a very tricky situation because, as I've said elsewhere, I'm not sure on previous sessions of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, but arming and bolstering the Haitian police is something that I've been against for the past 20 years. They flows out of the coup of 2004. And, it was tied into bringing former military and creating a repressive police force to politically control, to, wipe out La Valasse and all that stuff. But the reality is that the situation has disintegrated so much, and the power of gangs has risen so much that the police, as much as it's a repressive apparatus of the state, as much as they've been recently implicated in all kinds of killings, they become almost sort of like progressive vis-a-vis what seems to be the alternative. So it's just a very very grim situation. And I don't remember what around the tankies and debating the tankies. Yeah, I think that like it at this point I just feel scorn towards people who are still in the headspace of like, anyone who says that Yanukovych being ousted was a coup, or that Canada had a role, or people who say that NATO expansion contributed, or people who say that this is a proxy war. I don't know like what to do. I mean, I just like, I agree what Russia's doing is bad. What Russia's doing contravenes international law, but there is a context. There is a whole dynamic, and if you're just going to keep repeating these like completely meaningless sort of like, let's just keep ratcheting up tension. Let's just keep moving ourselves closer towards nuclear war. Let's just keep by saying, okay, well, Russia just needs to leave. Russia should leave. That's the position of Melanie Joly. I mean, okay, yeah, just keep repeating it. All you're saying is we want more people to die. We want a greater chance of nuclear Armageddon. We got to. So, anyways, go. Okay.
Nadia.
First of all, I want to congratulate you for your courage. Eve, I cannot imagine how courageous you are. Just unbelievable. I want to ask you also, I don't quite understand why is Israel bombing Syria? Why? What do they get out of it? I don't understand.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, they say when they bomb Syria, they usually say they're targeting Iranian something or other, right? Iranian backed. Sometimes they say there's going to be weapons, from Iran to Hezbollah, stuff like that. But Iranian backed groups. So I think Israel really is in a proxy war inside Syria with Iran. I think there is an element of that at play. I think Israel just wants to be, it can get away with it. There's just basically no reaction. So why not, right? Like, why not do it? And it wants to communicate the message, which I think has long been at the center of Israel's existence, of basically putting the Arabs in their place. And we can do this, and we're going to do this. And they've been doing that. Like, I mean,
Yeah, but how can they justify it? What's the justification?
they don't justify it. It doesn't even get barely reported in our media, and they don't admit to it. Sometimes they do, irregularly they admit to it. There's no condemnation from any officials. Syria is not really able to respond. I mean, that's what it all comes down to, right? Is that if Syria is able to like launch a missile at Tel Aviv, then the game would. That's why Israel's way more cautious around bombing Lebanon now, because Hezbollah can actually respond, right? And Hezbollah has, in 2006, as Hezbollah was able to, I don't know, defeat is the right word is defeat Israel, but they certainly stopped Israel from its principal objective. And so I think that they want to put the Arabs in the region in its place. They've been doing that. Israel, I mean, whatever you want to say about 47 and 48, okay, all the violence and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, you can at least kind of make the case that was about like founding a Jewish state, right? You needed to get rid of the Palestinians to fulfill the Zionist objective of founding a Jewish state, and you can frame that in a sort of defensive way, whether it was or not. That's a whole other, but you could at least frame it. But since 1956. I mean, how can it not be clear that Israel is just a Western imperial militarist outpost? Like with the British and the French, they invade Egypt because there's a government in Egypt that's pursuing decolonization policies. I mean, to weaken Nasser and then they just keep doing that, over the years. So since 56, how can you make any case other than Israel is just this Western colonial outpost in the Middle East, tied in 56 concretely to French and British imperialism, and then since 67 very clearly tied into American imperialism? That's what it's been. It's just been this violent external kind of force. It's not connected to the neighborhood it's in, right? If you look at like the whole question of refugees, that's one of those stark ones with Syria. Okay, like every country on the border of Syria, like Lebanon is Lebanon's a tiny country of 3 million people, something that had like, I forget the numbers off the head, like 2 million Syrians or something at one point. Every country, Turkey, 4 or 5, 6 million Syrians. Iraq, there's like 100 Syrian. Israel with a big border with Syria took in like 100 Syrian refugees, right? It has no connection to its regional context. It's just this European outpost, and it views itself in that way, and the world treats it in that way, and I think that the just bombing Syria whenever it decides it wants to. The only thing holding back its bombing of Syria is coordination with Moscow, right, with the Russians, and there's been some issues around that, and the air defenses, and so yeah, I think Syria, they wanted Assad gone. That would have been Israel's preference. They wanted to weaken the Iran, Syria, Hezbollah network, and clearly there was huge amounts of money, training, whatever, weapons pumped in by the US, Saudis, to try to get rid of Assad, and Syria.
I don't understand, because he's not a fundamentalist, so why are they trying to get rid of him? I don't understand.
Well, they didn't try to get rid of Nasser because he was a fundamentalist. They don't. The biggest worry from U.S. and Israel's historic perspective is exactly the opposite, which is secular Arab nationalism. Not they've used the fundamentalists, they've used the jihadist forces, just like Canada did in 2011. I mean, I mentioned that previously, right? The Canadian military, the Canadian Air Force joked. This was Puglisi that reported on this. The Canadian Air Force joked that they were Al Qaeda's Air Force. Right? They understood that the rebels they were supporting in Libya, that they were these jihadist forces. The Canadian military had internal assessments going back a couple of years before that the opposition in eastern Libya was this sort of jihadist opposition to Gaddafi, and they understood all this stuff, and they did that anyways. And look at Libya now. 12 years later. But so this is not about, they're not about, it's not about women's rights. It's not about like concern around jihadists. I mentioned the Canada File story that talked about the Mujahideen fighter from Afghanistan that came for the 40th anniversary of the celebration of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress's call for Ukrainian independence back in 1981. I mean, that's all part of that history too, of, whoever will do our dirty work, we'll support, and we'll turn, whoever into, good guys. And that's, whole backing of the Azov battalion in Ukraine today, and people who are, deeply entrenched in neo-Nazi kind of, or even Nazi thinking and memorabilia and history and whatever. We're willing to support them if they do our dirty work. So I think that's Israel. There is no doubt Israel wants the Middle East divided. That's very clear. I should also point, I meant to mention this, the very good development with around Yemen on Saudi Arabia and negotiations of peace agreement, right? Find a Canadian comment. So this is looking to put this terrible war in Yemen to an end. Find a comment of the Canadian government, like, supporting this, saying, hey, this is a great development. So China brings Iran and Saudi Arabia, they restart diplomatic relations. Now it looks like there's some serious negotiations to end the war in Yemen that partly come out of that. A great development, and nothing from the Canadian government, which tells us about, their outlook.
Beef Sandu had a question, but I guess he lowered his hand, so maybe that he doesn't want to ask it. So no, there's Joan Russo, if you have time for one last one.
Yeah, that's just, one last one. Go ahead, Joan.
Joan, you muted yourself. Oh, Beef Sandu's back as well.
There.
Yeah.
There, okay. When I listen to your presentations, I get more and more outraged, and I'm just wishing I was not too old to go to Ottawa and disrupt with you. I think it's wonderful what you're doing.
That's it. Thanks.
Okay, maybe
I was also going to say about Puglasi. He did a wonderful article with Jim Brumskill in 2001, criminalization of dissent, where he revealed all the things that the RCMP was doing.
B. Sandu had his hand up for quite a while, and it's back up.
Go ahead, but I don't see him.
Well,
why do I not see that?
Okay,
can you? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I see now.
He's muted. Can you unmute him?
Oh, unmute. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I was just going to say, Eve, that you could probably add another part to your list of complaints against Rwanda, and that is that, I'm sure you're aware of this, that I think it was in 2022, Rwanda actually became a member of the Commonwealth, and the celebration actually was on April the 20th.
Francophonie, I believe.
No, Commonwealth.
Sorry.
Commonwealth. And this was all part of when Boris Johnson's political career was on the ropes, and he was basically just struggling and with his parties at 10 Downing and trying to sort of find a way out. In April of last year, he signed what was interestingly called the UK-Rwanda Migration and Economic Development Partnership. What it was, in effect, was to ship refugees that were arriving, migrants and whatnot, across the English Channel to Rwanda. So let's not forget that. So
that's part of why Kagame is liked, right? He's willing to do something
exactly
egregious as that, of taking people that the UK doesn't want, and understand that people in African countries understand that this is very racist kind of thing, right? And lots of refugees coming in from Ukraine. That's not a problem in Britain, but others. And of course, during the Trudeau met with Kagame during the Commonwealth Summit in Kigali. But I do actually, I mentioned the Francophonie, and there's a bit of a controversy going on in the French media here around, it's Rwanda and the former foreign minister Rwanda, Kagame's foreign minister, who's the head of the Francophonie, and Canada just cut its funding to the Francophonie because there's this sort of scandal around her behavior as head and spending incredible amounts of money on this her housing in Paris. And I don't know if people.
There's a piano. She bought a massive piano.
Yeah.
In the house.
But so there's an interesting context there around the Francophonie. And the people who have been the big critics of Kagame in Canada, like Robin Philpott, and they part of what happened in Rwanda in between 1990 and 94 is actually a battle between the Anglosphere and France. And while Rwanda was not a French colony, it was a German and then Belgian primary colony. So it's a French speaking. The elite were French speaking. Now, it's unlike most African countries. Almost everyone speaks Kinyarwanda because the Tutsi Empire was actually really big. It was like 10 million people. So it was actually a very homogenous, one of the most homogenous countries in Africa. And okay. So, but sorry. But there's a linguistic. So one of the things Kagame did. Kagame was an Anglophone. He grew up in Uganda. He was a Tutsi that left, and he was an English speaker. And Uganda is a former British colony, of course. And they have brought English. They've basically supplanted French as the primary colonial language, and turned to English. And so the fact that that the Francophonie is headed by a Kagameist or RPF person is a real slap in the face to the sort of the French power in Africa. And anyway, so there's an interesting kind of linguistic backdrop to the whole question of Rwanda, and the fact that Rwandan heads the Francophonie and hosted the Commonwealth meeting in the same year is a sort of kind of an interesting dynamic. And I should just go one step further with that. The reason why Romeo Dallaire leads the UN, this is Robin Philpott's thesis, why Romeo Dallaire leads the UN military mission in 1993 in Rwanda to try to end the war, that's the RPF invasion from Uganda, is that they didn't want the Americans didn't want a French. So Canadian, because we have French speaking, but we're pro-American, versus you needed to be a French speaker that led the mission, but it didn't want it to be from France or another country, an African country that was close to France. So the Americans wanted a Canadian to lead it because they speak French. There has to be a French speaker, and so Philpott, I think, probably slightly exaggerates, but there's a whole linguistic component to how Canada has helped the U.S. Supplant France in Africa, partly because we, obviously there are many French speakers in Canada, and so that helps with that kind of that dynamic. Anyway, so that's just because after the Cold War, the U.S. started moving into French, the France Afrique, while they were more willing to go along with French power in its former colonies. And its fear after the Cold War, the demise of the Soviet Union, Washington wanted to exert more and more influence. Anyway, so that's part of the backdrop. So Rwanda has some sort of interesting linguistic backdrops, and how Canada has become a major player is also tied into Canada's own linguistic dynamics. But it's already 7:15, so thanks everyone. Next week, same place, same time. Have a good night.